Recently on social media, there was an interesting video that popped up on my For You page, and instead of the normal brain-rotting garbage that I usually get, I found this simple video. It's a Blender project of a GameCube spinning around in a young boy's room with the dialogue, "It's a GameCube console. Would you like to play it?" It's not in your face, it's not flashy, and in accordance with how social media is, it doesn't really fit the kind of video that would get popular. However, what struck me instantly and what I think is part of the appeal of this video is the overall style of it. It's reminiscent of the early 2000s, and I don't say that because of the movie posters hanging in the background or the old staticky CRT TV, but because of the fact that it looks like something out of an old video game. The blocky aesthetics, the choice of text font, and even the screen tearing all look you in the eye and ask without saying a word, "You remember this, right?" And according to the comments, I believe that if the video asked the question in reality, that it would get an answer. People in this comment section reminisce about the memories one had with this console, about the games that were played on it and the relationships they formed through it. This simple video brought people back. And then I saw more of these videos, more videos that use this old PS1-like style to present beautifully made and serene videos that take the viewer back to a place that didn't exist. A place that takes them to a comfort haven, a rest stop, a checkpoint. These videos, for me at least, are a place to break away from the busyness of life and remember that it's okay to rest for a minute. It's nostalgic for me. I was born 10 years after the PS1 was released in America. So what is this? What is the appeal of an old video game console's aesthetic? Why is social media starting to use this stylistic choice more commonly? And why do I have a nostalgic connection to a console I did not grow up with? These were all questions I had upon seeing these videos, however they aren't the first time I've had these questions. I've played games well after the PlayStation's original release that use this aesthetic. I've watched YouTube videos with this old aesthetic, and now I can say I've scrolled from this video to this. However, what really strikes me is the connection and emotions that this console generation invokes in people. There's a nostalgic comfort that comes from the PS1 that is hard to replicate, a nostalgic comfort that shouldn't exist with people that didn't grow up with it. According to the few people I asked that were born after the PS1 and even after the PS1 successors, without any context given to what I was working on, a lot of them stated that they felt feelings of nostalgia and relief towards the videos they were shown which had the PS1 style. Some reflected on their own childhood days, some stated that it felt cold and distant, yet also close and warm, and some just simply got confused and asked me a question along the lines of, "Bro, what did you just send me and why am I watching a video of a pixelated Pop-Tart?" This form of media, or rather the presentation of this form of media, really makes people feel things and even takes them back to an era where they were not even alive. And look, you may be asking the same questions I stated above. Why are some of these videos getting millions of views? What is the appeal of this aesthetic, and who are you? All of these questions are related to something I like to call the PS1 effect. All of them except for the who am I question. My name's Landon. The PS1 is an interesting console to look at in retrospect for the sole reason that it was made in an era where the medium of gaming as a whole was changing suddenly and rapidly. This of course being the change from 2D gaming and platforming to three-dimensional planes of reality designed for the player to interact with. And some of the earliest games to experiment with 3D have a home on the SNES. Whether that be 2.5D games like Donkey Kong Country or full-on ambitious 3D games like Star Fox, Nintendo was clearly trying to renovate the industry and push it in a certain direction, to create a plane of reality that the player could truly explore however they wanted. Now of course there were games not developed by Nintendo that had attempted to create 3D environments like Ultima Underworld, this RPG released for the DOS, Battlezone, this 1980s arcade tank shooter, or Balls, which is a fighting game with balls. However, Nintendo really wanted to push 3D gaming further than just an experiment. They wanted to make it the expectation, to crush their competition such as Sega and Atari out of the industry. However, what they didn't expect was to see a new competitor rise at the beginning of this transition period, the PlayStation. Sony, who previously worked with Nintendo to create a CD-ROM add-on for the SNES in which they cut ties because of the failed project, set out to create and develop their own console capable of not only running CD-ROMs, which allowed the console's library of games to contain more data, but also heavily advertised 3D gaming made possible by the PlayStation. Ken Kutaragi, the creator of the console, spent years working on the PlayStation along with his team of 9 other people, and even then, it wasn't a guarantee they would be allowed to continue working on the project, Ken Kutaragi having to persuade the Sony executives, including Norio Oga, to have them back him up. I really like this piece of trivia, where at one point to convince the Sony executives that the project was worth it, he essentially in narrow terms said he wanted to flip off his old bosses at Nintendo, and all the other guys were like, yeah, let's do it, but make it so good it forces Nintendo to piss the bed. Eventually, after years of development, the PS1 was unveiled during an electronics show, and Sony made it clear that this wasn't just an attempt at transporting games into the third dimension. This wasn't an illusion to make it look like a 3D game. These were fully functioning, fully traversable 3D environments, something Nintendo would follow up on nearly 2 years after the release of the PS1. While Sony may not have been the ones who created 3D gaming, they were absolutely the ones to fully realize it and make it the staple of at-home games. And added with the partnerships they formed with third-party studios that allowed development on some games to start early and release at launch, the PS1 released with a robust amount of launch titles, with many more games coming quickly after. The PlayStation was revolutionary to the point of where it impacted the whole industry as a whole. However, it isn't exactly 1994 anymore. Nowadays, looking at the PS1 and the library of games on the console, it's obvious the limitations that held the console back, and it's easy to point them out, especially if, like me, you grew up in a generation that was not the PS1. It's easy to point out how blocky character models look, how the textures look like something out of Xenoblade on the 3DS, or how simple the shadows and lighting is. However, it's also easy to forget how much of a development this was. 2D platformers and RPGs character models and environments were consistently created with pixel art to match up with their respective consoles' limitations. However, with the PS1, Sony and other third-party game devs were not afraid of breaking out of the constraints of 2D, even if the third-dimensional capabilities they had at the time would be outdated within 10 years. And in turn, this creates this bizarre mesh of realism and limitation, a system which reached for the stars and made it to the moon. This results in an aesthetic that is warm and cozy because of how foreign it feels today and how foreign it felt back then. I wasn't alive in the 90s, however, a common sentiment I hear from people is how they remember these games looking better than they actually do, and in a way, I think I understand why people can say that. The realism that came from these games at the time alongside the secondary media that came with them, such as manuals and art books, created a complete sense of immersion in these games that you can't really replicate nowadays. Back then, the PS1 and even the 3D gaming world as a whole was absolutely magical, to the point of where if it was seen by people from the 1600s, they would probably burn it. The PS1, it's from hell, burn it. My wife wants a divorce, sounds like a spell. However, I cannot look at these old PS1 games with a sense of amazement because I've already been exposed to future console generations and in turn more advanced technology. A friend of mine put it really well when asked about the PS1 effect and aesthetic. People often remember things as better than they are, so with the memories and experiences that are enhanced with time, the experience of the early video games is enhanced as well. This gives me comfort. The limitations that the PS1 and as a whole 90s video game consoles had became invisible at the time and only became visible when looked at in retrospect. The PS1's aesthetic is a surreal mix of realism and unrealism, which I think creates this sort of nostalgic feeling of distant memories that feel tangible but aren't quite there. Maybe it's the idea of seeing a childhood I never had. This bizarre mix of realism and limitation created a whole fake sense of nostalgia. However, in a way, I think it's unfair to call it a fake nostalgia to begin with. Some people may not have been alive in this era, but it brings them back. Maybe not to playing the PS1, but swinging at the park or playing the PS3 instead. Maybe it takes you back to recess and kindergarten. Maybe it inspires you to create a car that looks like an unfinished PS1 model. Maybe it takes you back to hanging with an old friend that isn't a part of your life anymore. This lo-fi surrealistic aesthetic impacted people in many different ways, and one specific genre that took full advantage of this was survival horror. The survival horror genre before the PS1's release was more obscure than me and my weird obsession with Mocha Mocha Friends, and the evident reason why that is because there really weren't any survival horror games. Sure, there were adventure games that used horror elements in some sections, such as Mystery House, Earthbound, and Echo the Dolphin, which, by the way, who in God's name thought this was okay? However, in terms of true horror experiences, there were barely any options, Sweet Home and Alone in the Dark being some of the only true early survival horror games I could find. The limitations of hardware at the time meant that developers wanting to truly scare the player had to work outside the box, a box that not many were willing to escape. However, through the PS1's weird mesh of realism and unrealism in terms of its graphical standards, survival horror found its home with Resident Evil and Silent Hill, two games that did not just have developers reconsider the possibility of horror games on modern hardware, but impacted the landscape in unimaginable ways back then and even to this day. Bloober, you have one chance at this remake. One chance, and if you mess it up, I'm going to burn down Poland! Oh, you don't like that, do you? I wrote that joke before the team showed more gameplay and trailers, and it actually looks really good now, so now I'll just say, Bloober, please pull through for us. And look, through today's standards, yeah, the horror just doesn't work sometimes. The blocky character models, the fact that zombies look like more curved Minecraft NPCs and low resolution all come together to form this feeling that you are playing a game that was made close to 30 years ago. I think the creators of both Resident Evil and Silent Hill understood that they were limited on how to spook the player due to the hardware available at the time, and so in turn really put emphasis on the game's atmosphere and overall feel and implemented that atmosphere into the mansion of the first Resident Evil and the town of Silent Hill. And this results in this unsettling feeling that there is something out there watching you every step of the way, waiting for an opportunity to come after you. But it also results in this lonely, reflective experience, wandering the empty halls or foggy snow-filled roads. The atmosphere made these games come to life, and alongside the secondary media that accompanied them, made these worlds feel isolated and lonely, which in turn elevated the game's feeling as a whole. Even the actual horror found in these games feels unique due to the limitations it had, Resident Evil throwing the player in tense situations, escalating the sense of danger a player got, and Silent Hill showing grotesque, messed up imagery to invoke a sense of shock and dread. However, even excluding the big PS1 staples of survival horror, there are so many hidden gems that use horror in interesting ways. Parasite Eve distorts animals, making things like dogs scary. You a good girl, don't worry, don't you? Yes you are, yes you are. Clock Tower uses Edward Scissorhands as its main enemy. Alone in the Dark, the new nightmare, similar to Silent Hill, uses an oppressive atmosphere to create an uneasy feeling, and Dino Crisis puts you in Jurassic Park and reminds you that you are probably not the main character. Through some of these games, you can evidently see the inspiration for them. However, something you can also see and feel is how defined they are by the era they were born into and the generation that experienced them. For many, these are games they can find comfort in which they can endure the hostility and find peace in. And through this intentional atmosphere, shocking imagery, and even bizarre nature combined with the cozy surrealistic limitations of the PS1, it meshed together to form an incredible experience, both equally terrifying and yet uncanny and peaceful. It managed to create a subgenre I like to call lo-fi horror. And then the PS2 released in the year 2000. And then 6 years later, we got Persona 3, baby! Banger honesty! I'm talking real good stuff! After a 6-year run, the PS1 eventually ran its course and quickly became outdated with the release of the PS2, the successor to the original PlayStation, which straight up re-envisioned how games in a 3D space could look. Gone were the pixelated textures and muddy character models alongside the low resolution and environments, and in replacement was an overall cleaner look that defined the console generation, one in which environments looked clear and character models looked real. And this was a downright game changer in terms of the progression of 3D games and their limits, which kinda jump-started what I like to call the how did we go from this to this in 10 years era. However, with this inevitable progression of hardware, the PS1 and its entire aesthetic kinda got lost to time. What was celebrated as revolutionary became dated in old hardware, and eventually this kind of aesthetic was sorta lost to time, kept alive through small underground communities, more specifically the indie scene. Indie developers saw an opportunity to use this unique style in their games. However, I think that for many indie developers, this wasn't as much a stylistic choice as much as it was a development one. With later technology, it became much easier to code and create games, with game studios and development teams really taking advantage of this fact. However, with indie developers and the tiny nature of their team, I can imagine that many indie studios and developers chose to code their game with an older look to make it a smoother process to develop. And while, yeah, oftentimes there is a sense of artistic vision that goes into making decisions like creating a game with the intention of going back 30 years with its visuals, there's no denying how many indie studios possibly chose to use the style from another console generation to cut development time and save themselves several issues, many indie titles not restricting themselves to the PS1 only, but often the SNES or NES or old computer gaming consoles. And that is not to say they are lazy. In fact, I think indie developers are the hardest working people in the industry, but with the decision of using an older aesthetic, it eases a lot of work and time they need into making sure things run and operate the way it is supposed to, which oftentimes is not possible when making a AAA game with a small team. However, in a way, you can see how over time those aesthetics impacted those developers, some people making the old school look less of a simple artistic choice to cut development time and more of an integral part of the game's identity. And you can find this everywhere, from the SNES pixel art of Celeste or the staticky line work and image of Buddy Simulator, all the way to the re-envisioned PS1 look of Signalis, which pays homage to PS1 survival horror, while also managing to help retroactively resurrect the mainstream popularity of the PS1 style. Signalis is an absolutely fascinating game. Developed by Rose Engine and released on the tail end of 2022, Signalis is a survival horror game that feels like an intentional mesh of borderline everything uncanny, from the imagery and body horror Silent Hill, the gameplay structure and combat of Resident Evil, to the Lovecraftian subtext thematic way of storytelling, and multitude of references to the King in Yellow, all topped off with an aesthetic that feels not too distant to the 5th generation of consoles. Signalis is one of those games that I played where the only way I can truly describe it is by saying that it is less of a game I played and more a journey I experienced, filled with its horrors beyond comprehension, along with beauty beyond human limitation. However, part of what makes this game so special is that it brought back something that was missing from current survival horror games made by AAA studios, and that was the calming lo-fi horror that we talked about earlier. Oh, and I forgot to mention that if you were not aware, the Silent Hill series was pretty dead at the time, and again, depending on this remake, might die again. Signalis brought that calming peace yet instantaneous chaos that made the PS1 era shine so brightly, the quiet and uneasy horror coming together to form a journey so clear in intention yet all the while intricately encrypted in its understanding. Signalis choosing to have its entire narrative be designed like an unorganized puzzle and forcing your brain to come up with the picture that the puzzle forms. Signalis, when it released, became a new hitting cult classic and fan favorite. However, over time, the game started reaching people. Signalis videos and explanations started getting hundreds of thousands of views. The game started getting recommended to fans of survival horror, and it quickly became one of the most famous survival horror indie titles to be released in recent years. And god dude, I love Signalis, man. It might be my favorite survival horror game I've ever played. Aside from the aesthetic and atmospheric appeal that I just mentioned, the combat, story, characters, and enemy design really clicked so well together, man. There's even a subreddit for it, which I actually looked at to see some cool fan art and theories. All I have to say is you sick bastards. Why is there so much porn? Signalis, while smaller in comparison to other indie titles, became a juggernaut of survival horror. However, what really made it stand out was that, like many other indie titles, Signalis felt like a game made for the PS1, but what made it and its art style so much cooler is that it didn't feel like something that could be possible for the PS1, and instead feels like it belongs on a console between the PS1 and PS2, a console that does not exist. Signalis has the spirit and look of a PS1 game, but then has these moments that make you realize that, oh yeah, this isn't that. Like the strobe effects that would certainly burn the frame rate, the fact that the music sounds like something that shouldn't exist on the PS1, that the backgrounds aren't pre-rendered but are fully functional 3D environments with their own shadows, or how the game is set in a dystopian future that is similar to our own in 2024, and how those ties shouldn't exist for a game supposedly made on a console long before today. And I know that sounds like I'm bringing up small little things to try and prove a big point, however, you don't really realize how much impact these things have until you experience them in something you really shouldn't. Like, this is what a song from Final Fantasy VII on the PS1 sounds like. And this, on the other hand, is what a song from Signalis invoking those same feelings sounds like. Am I spitting or am I tripping? The music of Signalis does not sound like something out of a PS1 game, and while this blends beautifully with the overall feel and themes of Signalis, and I would have it no other way, it also creates this feeling that Signalis is a game that shouldn't exist in the way that it does. that it shouldn't exist looking like something made a generation ago. Man, I hope this isn't just something I got from this game, otherwise I just spent the past 300 words or so yapping about nothing. However, the reason why I just spent so long talking about a surrealistic horror game was to paint a picture of how flawless the team over at Rose Engine did at creating this world and integrating the PS1 aesthetic into it, and also to transition to what I would like to call, oh my god, there's so much PS1 stuff! Hi, so this is the future me, sort of like it's the past me for you, but it's the future me for recording me. You know what, this is confusing. I'm the editor version of Landon, and I am about to kindly inform you that for the next however many minutes, you are about to be subject to a tangent of me losing my mind over how talented people are at making PS1 stuff, while also reminding myself that I do not compare to the legends that made this stuff. Okay, are you ready? Signalis and a number of indie titles such as Anno Mutationem, Hypnagia, Lunacid, and many more games are ones that use a PS1 aesthetic, with those developers probably feeling inspired to create a game similar in look to the ones they grew up with. However, what I find interesting is not only how these games inspired future titles and projects, but how it brought light to smaller projects. For example, Crow Country is a recently released short survival horror game that makes itself chibi and PS1-like, and it still manages to create beautiful and appealing environments. Like, are you serious? Lethal Company is a party game that uses its PS1 style for gags and jump scares, and due to it being a party game, stuff goes down that I will not disclose, but for a sample of how me and my friends act while playing games together, here's this. Penis. Buckshot Roulette is the game to play if you are a suicidal gambler, and it looks so good, man. I swear this and Inscription are love letters to the PS1 era. Omnibus is a game where you drive giant buses, which you can flip the vehicle, jump the vehicle, kill the vehicle, and much more. And it fits because it feels like a game coming from an era where this wouldn't seem weird. Broken Reality is a game where TVs have bodies. Valverde is an Animal Crossing-like game that feels and looks like it came out of the PS1. And Petscop is a... okay, you probably caught on. Valverde and Petscop are not real games. These are YouTube video series on the internet made to look like an old PS1 game, meaning that this isn't actual gameplay. This is an animation that both use the concept of being a lost, unreleased video game to whole new levels. Valverde looks like an Animal Crossing game until it starts turning into this twisted cultish game that once again is not real. Petscop is a surreal horror YouTube video series that has 24 parts which follows a young guy's let's play. Resident Evil Village is a game that exists, and it is a game that Hulupe redesigned into a PS1 art style and posted as a YouTube video. Bloodborne is a real game that had its own PS1 demake video and then became a real PS1 like game based off of the real PS4 game. That is insane! Cyberpunk 2077 was demade into a PS1 game which contains all of the beauty, glitches, and bad game design remade into a PS1 setting with said glitches changed to make it feel at home on the console. The Witcher 3, Elden Ring, Resident Evil 2 Remake Demake, Death Stranding, God of War, Dead Space, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us, Spider-Man 2, Skyrim, Fallout, Halo, Starfield, Uncharted, GTA 5, the Bible for PS1. Wait, that doesn't exist. But imagine if it did! Every single one of these games have a PS1 demake video that you can watch right now, all filled with an incredible amount of passion and effort thrown into them. And there are more that I know I have not discovered, and wouldn't you want to know something? That's only covering games and media made to look like a PS1 game. Other consoles, there's more, there's so much more. What if Luigi's Mansion was a 2D GBA game? What if Disco Elysium became an old Game Boy mystery game? What if Silent Hill 2 was a skateboarding game? I'm looking for my wife Mary. Have you seen her? James, she died. She was sick. How sick? What if Sonic the Hedgehog was on the Pico 8 handheld? What if the Bible was a video game on the PS2? Wait a minute. But dude, look at this. Look at how much effort was poured into each and every project I simply mentioned. Look at how incredible these passion projects are. And these are just YouTube videos, bro. These are not real games. Bro, everything I just mentioned is not real. There is an endless abyss. I've been falling down. There is no end. And I'm slowly losing my mind. All right, big tonal shift here. So after all of this talk about old survival horror games, about creating magic through limitation, about how beautiful the style was, and after incoherently rambling about, well, whatever that was, what is the point? What is the point of the PS1 effect? Why does this video exist? And why did the people over at Sony decide to make an aesthetic that would be remembered for generations? And to answer that, I think it's important to realize how accidental this entire thing was. The PS1 aesthetic wasn't made because they wanted to create a nostalgic, unique style. It was made to surpass the limits that existed at the time, yet even still was held back due to the hardware available. This art style in a way could be looked at as a mistake and a failure by today. However, what makes it so beautiful to so many people, and even individuals like myself who were not alive in that time period, is that I think the PS1's aesthetic perfectly encapsulates that childlike lens on life we had around us when we were younger. For me, I find these social media videos, these games, these YouTube videos, this artwork nostalgic because they capture that feeling of what growing up feels like. How cozy and familiar it feels at points, and how unnerving and scary changes when you're young. The PS1 aesthetic unintentionally pictures that feeling in vivid detail. It's like this place in time which you don't understand, but you understand what you're supposed to feel. There's this scene in Signalis in which, without much context, you witness a sort of vision or memory in which you watch two lovers, one of which is your character, embrace, talk about their anniversary, and dance to classical music before falling asleep side by side. The first time you watch this, you really aren't given context whatsoever. However, while you don't understand what's going on, you understand exactly what you are supposed to feel. There's this melancholic happiness, this sense that this is a happy memory surrounded by sorrow and despair, and that you're watching two people try to hold on to the love they have for one another while knowing that there isn't much happiness beyond the doors of this room. The only joy to be found here is through human connection, and this is emphasized even more when you learn more about what's going on here. The reason why this scene works is in part due to the nature of the game, but also because of the stylistic choice the game chose to use. This nostalgic aesthetic of the PS1 and the stories it can tell is one you can understand emotionally rather than logically, even if you didn't grow up in that generation. There's a childlike sense of comfort in games like Omnibus and Crash Bandicoot. There's a calming horror of change and the unknown revealed in Silent Hill and Resident Evil. There's a sense of surrealism found within videos like Valverde, and there's a grim comfort that can be found in games like Signalis. These emotions can be tied everywhere, but the PS1 somehow is the console that manages to make people feel these emotions the heaviest. In narrow terms, that is what I think the PS1 effect really is. It's just a feeling people got from a form of media from a different time. So after all of this, what I think I wanted to say is that the PS1 is special because it's something that inspired a lot of people. I think we're at this point in history where things inspire other things, in which those things inspire more things, where everything created has an inspiration behind it. And dude, I think that's awesome. The PS1 and its aesthetic is remembered because it managed to unintentionally create a whole vibe and cozy nostalgia while also managing to use that vibe and mold it into something twisted when it needed to, and I think that vibe is something people wanted to replicate. Many creators have come out and stated that their projects have been heavily inspired by others, and nowadays that goes for everything. Everything has an inspiration behind it. Your favorite game exists partly because of other games. Your favorite movie exists because the director's favorite movie exists. Heck, this channel only exists because of hundreds of creators that spent their time creating things that were also inspired by someone else out there. It's an endless cycle now, and I have a feeling that it's not one we can prevent from getting larger. And dude, honestly, I think that endless cycle of creativity is absolutely beautiful in its own special way. I think that, at the end of the day, is the PS1 effect. Hello there, friendly strangers on the internet. Thank you so much for watching. This was a blast on my end to make, so I hope that some of that passion translated into this video. However, for the $3 question, why did this video take so long, especially when I didn't want it to take this long at all, like I said in the past video? And to be frank, the reason for the wait comes up to two factors, the first of which being that I really wanted to dip my toes into how to make a scene in a video. What I mean by that, as an example, is that SNES edit, or those multiple PS1 collages I threw in this video. I wanted to learn how to create something that seemed to flow together very nicely rather than just random clips all over the place. However, the second factor is that me and my family went through a small little hurricane that completely distorted our lives for 2 weeks. Yeah, so my area went through a hurricane that kinda distorted our way of living for a while. Me and my family are all fine, my house is fine, we are all okay. I am very blessed to be in this situation, however many others were not. Roads were closed everywhere, power was out at least at my place for 2 weeks, and for some, other people have still not gotten power yet. And for a couple days there was just no way of contacting anyone outside of this area. As of now, I still don't have internet, but I do have power, which allows me to wrap up making the rest of this video. And if this goes live before I do get internet, it'll be because I copy and pasted the file onto my laptop, took my laptop down to one of the many internet hotspots throughout the area, and uploaded it from there. Outside of that, however, I've been watching Dandadan through my phone service, and it's a blast. I can't show any footage, obviously, because I have no internet, but I really liked the manga when I read it over a year ago, and the anime is fantastic. I mean, they're actually making me really love this sort of series as a whole. I know I made like 4 jokes, bashing Bloober Team for how I am scared of how they are going to make the Silent Hill 2 remake, and I downloaded it because I one time took my PC down to an internet hotspot. It was a hassle, I'm never doing that again, to install it because I was kind of curious. I'm just past Brookhaven, and it's phenomenal. Like, they straight up cooked with this remake. So, Bloober Team, sorry for all the mean jokes I said in this video. You guys absolutely cooked, at least during the first half of this game, and I have a feeling you won't fumble the second half due to the positive reception. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how you guys remade the second half of this game. But you guys freaking cooked with the first half. Please, please, I pray to God that you guys kept this momentum up. Oh, and one more thing. I made a Twitter account, or X account, or whatever. I'm calling it Twitter because X sounds like straight up Pornhub kind of crap. Through the light of this hurricane, I decided to make an account on there just so that I could, if any case I go through a natural disaster ever again, I can keep you guys updated about my situation and when you can expect delays and all that jazz. And granted, I've had an account on this site for a while now, but I've never publicized it. It's kind of just been my own little personal haven, so that's why I'm kind of opening it up now. So if you guys see like crap from like a year and a half ago, I am sorry. I didn't know how to write that well, and I kind of ramble in a lot of these posts. So go check me out over there if you're down for some updates about videos, or if you want to see me ramble about games I'm playing at the moment. I also do that on there too. I'll post a link for that in the description below. However, that said, that's all for me. How are you guys doing? I hope you guys are doing well in the light of these natural disasters and hurricanes, and I hope you guys, even if you aren't affected, are doing well. Anyways, this video is far too long, and this outro was even longer than I hoped it would be, so I'm gonna head out. Take care of others, and I will see you next time. I also bought the Persona 3 vinyl. It cost me a lot of money, and if you ask me why I bought this, I don't have a good answer.